can you tell me about your background and how you became a therapist?
Yeah, so my background personally is I'm from Miami, Florida.
Yeah.
I became a therapist because I have a big heart. No, I actually, the reason the thing that drew me to being a therapist, this is a true story. Maybe embarrassing a little bit, but it's true. I remember when I was like 15 or 16 years old, I was watching a Lifetime movie.
Okay.
I think it's called The Secret Life of Zoe. If you want to watch it, do it. I do have it on DVD, so if anybody wants to borrow it.
If you still have a DVD player.
I know. I don't know if I have one or not. But no, I don't think I've watched it in a long time because I don't have a DVD player. But I do have the DVD somewhere in my house stored away. But the movie was about this teenage girl who was just going through struggles. If I can recall correctly, I haven't seen it in a long time. I think her parents were going through a divorce and she was like really struggling emotionally. And her parents clearly struggled to know what to do or how to help this girl. She ended up getting involved in like drugs and some other stuff. I mean, she just wasn't doing well, right? Like she was clearly struggling with some depression. She ended up getting hospitalized in the movie, and she met a therapist that was assigned to work with her who was awesome. And you can see he really cared for this girl. And I remember watching this movie and being like, wow, that's really cool. Like, I want to do that. So thanks, Lifetime,
Nice.
for inspiring my career. So I've always wanted to do it. I went straight to my bachelor's from high school and my master's after college. And the rest is history.
Nice. Yeah. So a lot of people that, I don't know, how's it differ from like just majoring in psychology? Because obviously you have to like learn a lot about human psychology first. And then in your master's, do you specifically go into like classes on therapy? And like,
yeah, so there's a lot of different avenues to become a therapist. And I think that's actually an important thing to talk about, because what we see in movies is psychologist, psychiatrist. What's the difference between, is a therapist a psychologist? What's a counselor? So to be as like brief as possible, to be a practicing therapist and licensed in the state that you live to practice, you have to have at least a master's degree. Most therapists that have a master's degree have a track. It's called a track in clinical mental health counseling or social work. Clinical mental health counseling is my background. You have to have at least 2 years of full-time graduate work. Some social work programs, if you've done an undergrad in social work, they only require 1 year of full-time social work.
okay.
Graduate level work. Psychologists typically are licensed in psychology, and they specialize more in testing, like IQ testing for diagnostic reasons like autism spectrum disorder, written and verbal tests. So psychologists can practice therapy, but actually masters in mental health counseling and social work are more geared towards actually clinical practice. There are people that have their doctorates that can practice therapy, obviously, but beyond the 2 years of the same graduate level clinical work that I have, they do research, really. It's research focused, less clinical training, if that makes any sense.
Got it. And then psychiatry.
Medical.
That's
medical school, and they can provide therapy, but their specialty is obviously medicine. So diagnose and prescribe medication to help.
Drugs. Okay.
Yeah. So some psychiatrists will provide some therapy, but just the way our healthcare system is set up, a lot don't, because they're more expensive.
So you would, like if you suspect that one of your clients has some kind of disorder that could benefit from medication, you refer them to a psychiatrist, right?
Absolutely. Okay. So I have a lot of people that come to me specifically because I practice a holistic approach. So I look at the whole body, people's like mental, emotional, spiritual, physical well-being. So I try to say, okay, let's see if therapy can help this, right? So therapy is technically the lowest level of care. It's the least invasive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we can make lifestyle changes that will help you feel better, I will work on helping you do that. But some people, their struggles are just a little bit more intense and they can't get as much out of therapy as they'd like. So that's when I say, okay, let's see if we can get you a psychiatrist to see if a medication would help manage the symptoms enough that you can get more out of therapy and, you know, the lifestyle changes that we work on. Like, if that makes sense.
If they're suffering from severe depression and they're just saying things
like their motivation is so low that I can barely get them to session. I can't get them to go out for a walk when they know it might be beneficial to them. If it's really debilitating and they can't put into practice the things that we talk about in session, that's when I say, okay, let's see if, you know, a medication evaluation could, you know, help.
Got it. Okay. So can you describe the therapy process for maybe those who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah. So what I learned in grad school, the easiest way to intro somebody to what therapy looks like is 3 stages. So the first stage is like the exploration stage. So I'm really getting to know you as a whole, like what you're going through, what you've been through, and creating a bond, right? So we know that the biggest factor of success in counseling is your relationship with the therapist. So if you feel comfortable with me, we're more likely to do way better than if you don't, right? So the first stage is me just getting to know you and you seeing that when you share something that might be uncomfortable, that I'm not like, you know, like awkward.
So it's like trying to build trust, right?
Exactly. Building trust. After the exploration phase, that's when I venture into the insight stage is what I like to call it. So based on what I'm hearing from you, this is what I think might be going on, right? And so basically we're evaluating what you're doing. People do what works, right? So we come up with coping skills on our own early in life, and we do what works for us. So if, for example, avoiding our problems works, we're going to keep doing that. But at some point, sometimes people realize, avoiding my problems isn't really working for me anymore. Then that's the point where we get to the third stage of counseling, which is change, right? So I want to have close relationships, but it's not really working out for me well. And I'd say, okay, well, based on what I'm seeing, you seem to struggle with communicating how you feel and what you need in the relationship. So we say, how can we help you do that? So exploration, insight, change.
Okay. Are people usually receptive to trying to change, like, or do they have to come in with that intention?
That's a great question, actually. Some people really come in highly motivated. Some people come in and really don't realize the amount of work that counseling takes. So it's not enough to just vent about stuff. You typically do have to make some changes for things to get better. Venting does work to an extent, but only to an extent. So sometimes people come in with the motivation, sometimes people don't. My job is that you see that it's worth it to make some changes. But the changes have to come from the client, right? It can't be what I think is best. I can only say, based on what I'm seeing, you know, you can do this, you can do this. What do you think would be beneficial for you? You know, this could be helpful. My space is to increase awareness and provide education. So based on what people do that with that is up to them.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So when you get a new client, how do you treat that first session? Like, why is that session important?
Okay. So what I do even before the first session, and a lot of therapists do this, so it's good for people to know that have never been in therapy and are maybe looking for a therapist. A lot of therapists now in private practice will do what we call consult calls. So when I have somebody who reaches out to me and says, hey, Catherine, I was referred to you by so-and-so. I want to, engage in services with you. I'll say, great, let's get on a consult call. It's completely free. Most therapists will do them for free, and it's really good for the client and the therapist. The call, which typically is 10, 15 minutes, gives me a moment to say, okay, what is going on with this person? What might they need? I ask certain questions that kind of solicit that information and make sure we're compatible, not only with the presenting concerns and the skills that I have, but also scheduling. People don't think about that a lot, that you might sign up to see a therapist and, they only do appointments in the morning, and you're like, shit, I work till 5 o'clock every day, and there's no way I'm going to get off of work. So scheduling compatibility is huge, something that people don't think about, but I always ask when I do my consult call to make sure if we start to see each other, we're going to be able to continue.
Yeah.
Because there's no point of starting a process if you're not going to be able to see it out. Progress doesn't typically just occur in one session. It is
I wouldn't think so
a longer
either.
process than people think.
Do you know how long that process usually is, or is it always an ongoing, or is it all different compared?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's a good question, but it's hard to say. Some people resolve issues like within 10 to 12 sessions, right? But when we talk about resolving issues, you have to really think about what those problems are. Sometimes people come to therapy because they're suffering from depression symptoms or anxiety. Some people actually come to therapy because they want to learn more about themselves. We're all human and we all have blind spots. And so, one misconception with therapy is that people going to therapy are only going there because they're crazy and really mentally ill, when a ton of clients that I see are truly there just to better themselves, to live more authentically, with who they are, and just to enhance quality of life with themselves and their relationships.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that will tie into this a little bit. So what are some of the misconceptions people have about therapy?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it happens to be that people think that people only come to therapy because, they have problems. There must be something wrong with somebody if they're in therapy. But therapy, luckily, is actually seen as a great thing these days. Not amongst everybody. It's the culture is still changing a little bit, but it demonstrates somebody's willingness to be vulnerable and accept that they're human and that we all humans need help and none of us are perfect. So yeah, being in therapy doesn't mean something is wrong with you or that you're crazy. It just demonstrates a willingness to want to be better and know more, about yourself, which I think is great.
Yeah, I think for the most part, most people should go to therapy. I think it can be beneficial just to talk to someone, even if you feel like you don't need it for some particular problem.
Yeah.
Just to talk to someone about what's going on in your life and how you can do better, or how you can be more happier, or how you can, handle certain situations that are bothering you. I think having that is something that most people can benefit from, including myself, actually. I feel like I could benefit.
Absolutely. Everybody can benefit from therapy. I think it's an amazing tool. I've done it myself. A lot of therapists actually go to therapy themselves. We're our best self when we have a space where we can be vulnerable and share our true thoughts, feelings, and desires with hopes and expectations that we're not going to be judged. We don't have that everywhere we go in society, more now than ever. So that's why when you were asking about the first session, honestly, for the first session, the most important thing for me is for my client to see the human that I am in front of them. And I take a very business casual approach to therapy that, there's certain guidelines and policies that I adhere to for ethics and professional standards. But I'm a human, and what you see is what you get. I want to show you in the first session more than anything that you can share with me anything, and you're not going to see this level of discomfort or shock on my face. I'm going to let you be you and welcome all that you bring.
Yeah, and this is what could be different than if you were taking these types of problems to like a family member or a friend. Like there could be some judgment there, or there could
Absolutely.
be some, and taking it to a therapist, judgment-free zone. You can say whatever you want, and you can get that perspective without, some of the judgment you would get from your family or friends or anything like that.
Absolutely, 100%. And, there's also bias, right? Like, people have a bias because they want you to do certain things. They have their own, like, personal interest, whether we like it or not.
Especially parents, they always feel like they know what's best for you.
That's so true. That's so true, right? Like, they're invested in certain outcomes. And so, we're humans too, therapists. And so, we have some biases about things, obviously, but that's part of our training is to try to get rid of the bias and be aware of any biases that you might have that could interrupt a relationship. So that's a big part of, my graduate school experience. It's really kind of like 2 years of therapy where you're just learning about you and any biases you have to make sure that they don't enter the room unexpectedly and cause harm to the people that we work with. So, yeah, for sure. That's part of my job is trying to be as, blank slate as possible.
Mm-hmm. And someone who wants to do therapy, what are some of the, if someone's hesitant or nervous about therapy for the first time, what advice would you offer them to like seek it out?
Yeah, so I would just tell them it's super normal. Most people are nervous when they do anything for the first time, let alone therapy. Therapy is something where you're going into it expecting to be vulnerable and share things that you wouldn't normally share with somebody else, or you're waiting to receive feedback, and that can be nerve-wracking. So for first timers, I would just let them know it's normal. Anytime you do something for the first time, you're going to be nervous, but you're obviously thinking about therapy for a reason. So kind of trust that gut and know that more likely than not, you're going to be happy that you did it. Is every experience in therapy perfect? No, I know that there's plenty of people that have had experiences with the therapy process itself or therapists that haven't always been stellar, and that's a shame. But we do what we can to control the field. You can't control it 100%, right? Because we're humans. But for most circumstances, I think people end up being really happy that they did it versus not at all.
And this is why it's important. Like, just because you've went to one therapist and it didn't work out doesn't mean someone else can't help you, right?
100%. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon that you talk to somebody and you're like, yeah, I went to this therapist and it was really awkward, or she said this one thing, and it happens and it's sad. But to hopefully not let it to discourage you, to continue to seek, the provider that's right for you.
Yeah.
That is why I really like that people get on the phone with me prior to a first session, because usually pretty quickly you can tell if you're going to be comfortable with somebody or not. So shop around, right? Like you can do a consult call with me, do a few others, get some comparison. Like when I was on the phone with this person, it felt really awkward and stiff, and and this other person felt better. Even if you get into a session or two and you try and it's just not there, it's okay to try somebody else. There's a right fit for everyone.
No therapist is going to be like offended. Like if you're just like, oh, I don't know if we're clicking or anything like that.
No, I mean,
or at least they shouldn't.
No, I mean you shouldn't. Like are there humans out there that sometimes they get disappointed or offended by something that a client says? It definitely happens, but we're trained to be mindful of the client's experience and not to take things personally, because most of the time it's not personal. But yeah,
So what can you tell us a little bit about your clientele and like some of the common themes that they come in for therapy?
Yeah, so I see a wide range of clients. 20s, 30s, 40s age-wise is probably my most common, but I see outliers in that. I see a little bit younger, and I see a little bit older. Most people are coming in to better themselves. I definitely have plenty of people that struggle with depression and anxiety, lots of trauma, different types of trauma. But ultimately, at the end of the day, most of my clients just want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel connected. They want to feel like they belong, which is kind of why you and I had stumbled upon, like, maybe talking about attachment today, because, you know, we all have that, like, drive to be loved and feel like we belong somewhere. I think now more than ever, we're struggling a little bit with that. Social media, the digital age, we're disconnected. There's the illusion that we're connected via social media, but, you know,
We've never been
but
more.
we're also very polarized, right? And I think because we're so polarized, that's why we're seeing an uptake in depression, anxiety, mental health issues. And so, yeah, that's why we talked about that.
Yeah, so I do feel like social media, this is like a common trend that I see being talked about in a lot of different places, is as connected as we are, why has it been so difficult for people to date? Because even anecdotally and from personal experience, even though we have all these options to meet people, we still can't seem to find somebody, versus like before the internet and before dating apps, it seemed like people would get into relationships more than they are now. Like, I feel like being single is on the rise. Is that true or not? Do you know?
You know, I don't know the actual numbers of that. I can't speak to it, but I definitely can see in my practice that people are struggling more, for sure, with feeling connected. I think that, like you had said, like, even though we feel connected digitally, a true connection, what attachment really is an emotional bond. And, you know, that's an emotional bond that also deals with conflict, because all emotional bonds are going to deal with conflict. And I think we're struggling to do that these days because we don't have as much practice, right? Like, when you're over, you know, the internet, social media, you can avoid conflict more. You can avoid people, right? Because you're behind a screen. So I think we're getting a little rusty with our social skills, our ability to see humans as humans
and not just a profile.
Imperfections, like, you know, I think we're getting a little skewed and wanting to see perfection on the screen, see perfection within ourselves, and what is perfection? You know, like, it's subjective, and it's not realistic to
what social media tells us it is, right?
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so how can understanding and recognizing attachment styles, like, improves one's interaction?
Yeah, so when we talk about attachment, there's kind of like two ways to talk about it, right? So there's attachment between people, like you and I, right? Like, we can form an attachment, and if we're not approaching that attachment in the healthiest ways, our relationship would suffer and we would become isolated. That is a problem because we're social beings, and our survival rates actually increase in numbers, which is why it's this innate drive to attach, evolutionary wise. That's why we have that innate drive to attach. And also, if we relate to ourselves well, we're more likely to be confident, to take risk, like trying new things. Whereas if we, you know, really doubt our relationship with ourselves and who we are, it can really limit us, and it can cause, you know, a lot of mental health issues. So I think, you know, the big common theme, like I was saying in my practice, is that, you know, people are struggling with certain things. They want higher quality of life. And a lot of it is because they're not really knowing how to relate to themselves in what is considered like a healthy way. Again, whether it's within themselves or others.
Okay. So attachment just doesn't have to be romantically. It can also be friends, family, coworker, anybody.
Yeah. So when we look back at, like, attachment theory, John Bowlby is, like, one of the founders of attachment theory. And typically when it was looked at back in the day is that we attach to one primary caregiver at first, usually, and that those interactions with that caregiver heavily influence our attachment style, but there's other factors too, right? Because we know that there might be siblings at play, other caregivers, the outer world, right? So there's not one factor that influences how somebody develops an attachment style. There's actually multiple attachment styles, and different ways for them to be developed. But yes, we start with a primary caregiver attachment, and then we take what we've learned from that mini world, so to speak, and apply it to our outer world. So we learn to attach to friends, coworkers, business partners, and that attachment style that worked for us in some capacity when we were younger, that we were conditioned to have, carries out typically later on in life, whether to your liking or not.
Got it. Okay. So I guess this was I don't want to call it an experiment, but the experiment of children being attached to their mothers, right? Like how they would treat, what kind of attachment they would have to their parents as they left or as they entered.
Are you're talking about like a historical experiment?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that was Mary Ainsworth's study called the Strange Situation Test, where children were, it's really sad.
I know.
I don't know if they'd be allowed to repeat it because of ethical standards, but they were locked in a room, and the mothers were told to leave. And based on how the mothers interacted with them and how the child protested moms leaving was where the research on attachment theory started to go. Yeah, she was somebody who came after Bowlby. There's another experiment. I don't know if you've heard about the monkey experiment. So this is Harlow's monkey experiment. So to be brief, monkeys were put in a cage, and there's two fake wire moms. It's not an actual monkey. It's wires.
Okay.
And one has food, and one has a terry cloth over it. And so they wanted to see who the monkey favored, and the monkey would go to the wire one without the terry cloth with food, but spent most of the time with the wire monkey that didn't have food but had the terry cloth because it was comforting and nurturing. So it spoke to, yes, we need food to survive, but we heavily need nurturing too. So yeah, that definitely informed attachment theory.
Got it. Before we get into discussing the different types of attachment theory, in your opinion, do you think attachment is somewhat biological, or is it learned? Everyone is from set zero, and your experience in life being, growing up.
Yeah.
The attachment is learned. How much do you think is biological? How much do you think is environment?
Yeah, so I can't give you numbers, but it's both. It's just like with mental health, it's some nature, some nurture. So biologically, we are wired for connection. All humans have that desire. Now, it can be not the desire, but emotion and attachment can kind of get extinguished, I guess, if there's no reciprocation. That's definitely more the severe cases, which ends up, people end up having antisocial personality disorder, sociopaths. But yeah, there's multiple factors. It's not just nature or nurture. We all have that desire, but environment and socialization heavily impacts how we attach to people.
Got it. Okay. I figured it would be.
Yeah.
Yep. It's going to be both.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into the different variants of attachment.
Okay. Yeah. So, to break it down as simplistically as I can, we have the gold standard secure attachment over here, and then we have insecure attachment. So under insecure attachment, we have what's called anxious attachment. Some people call it anxious preoccupied, different literature refers to it in different ways, but essentially anxious attachment.
Okay.
And then you have avoidant attachment. So under that insecure umbrella, you have those two styles in which people, interact with attachment figures. Then in that, sometimes people demonstrate both. They can fluctuate. So anxious attachment style, also called anxious preoccupied, is people that are anxious have a strong desire and capability to attach and form attachments, but they tend to have a lot more fear and worry about those attachments and continued attachment, that person would continuously be there for them. Then avoidant also has the desire to attach, right? But they struggle to know how to attach to get their desires and needs met via communication or whatnot. So they tend to avoid, those conversations. Whereas the secure attachment is, I have thoughts and feelings and desires and needs, and I feel comfortable that I can express those to my partner and I can count on them to reciprocate most of the time. Are there going to be misses sometimes? Of course. But they feel most trusting that, yes, my partner will, attend to my needs. They'll be accessible. They'll be responsive. And that they're not perfect, right? There's not this, like, they have to be this way or another. So that's kind of a general overview.
Got it. Okay. So let me see if I can just do a quick summary for me. So we have secure attachment. So people that are very open to talking about their feelings towards whoever the relationship is.
Yep, trusting.
Then we have insecure, anxious. Okay. And they are worried that their attachment or that their partner or that, whatever the relationship is, that they're not getting what they need. And they're constantly worried about it. They're anxious about it.
Yep. And so these are the people that this attachment style, unfortunately, sometimes can
overthink things, maybe? Or...
Yeah, definitely can overthink things. They're definitely more like sensitive to picking up on behaviors, facial expressions that might cause them to question the security of their attachment. They're usually pretty good and accurate with those. Yeah. But not all the time, right? They're humans, but they are very perceptive. So that's great. They have a really strong desire to attach. But like I said, sometimes, they don't feel comfortable and confident in getting those needs met. And they, kind of can expect the worst. These are the people that sometimes, unfortunately, get labeled needy.
Needy, yeah.
Which
I
hate because... Every single person, whether they're secure, anxious, or avoidant, or a mixture of the two, they have needs. They just have a different way of going about them. They also can feel very nervous about communicating their needs because they don't want to appear needy. So that can kind of cause them to maybe be a little bit avoidant at times, right? So that's why we sometimes have that mixture between anxious and avoidant sometimes.
Gotcha. Okay. And then we have the avoidant, who is when they're feeling like when they're having issues with the attachment, instead of bringing it up, and they just completely shut off and just maybe don't talk about it or
right they're uncomfortable with like closeness. They crave closeness, but they don't feel comfortable addressing those issues. So if somebody brings some needs or desires, they're more likely to either avoid or shut down, minimize, because they don't know how to deal. They don't have those skills essentially. So they tend to have learned that independence is like the most important thing, to minimize your level of need, although they still have a desire and need to be close to someone and to attach. But they've been taught that emotions maybe aren't great. You can't communicate safely about your feelings. And so they value their independence and autonomy.
Yeah, this probably applies to most men.
So I think that's like a great thing that you mentioned, because socialization has a huge, play in this, right? So when we talked about, okay, how do these, attachment styles form? Like I said, yes, your primary caregiver is a huge influence on what that looks like, but socialization has a huge impact on not only that primary caregiver and how they attend to your needs as a baby, as a child, but also the people around you, right? And what you see.
So society and culture definitely influence on like what it is,
100%. So I don't know, this might be a good book. I don't know if you ever want to read it. But Terrence Real, he wrote a book called I Don't Want to Talk About It, which is very fitting because it's about men's mental health and depression in men.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he talks about how he gives a lot of examples. He's a therapist as well, so he uses some anonymously, obviously, some examples from his practice of experiences that men have had, right? So we are more likely traditionally within our culture to tell our boys, don't cry, to ignore emotions, and to foster, like, be tough, be a man, which is synonymous with don't have emotions, don't talk about your feelings, don't talk about your needs. And we tend to, like I said, ignore or downplay their feelings, whereas with women, it's more socially acceptable for us to be emotional and needy. So it's like we're more likely to tend to little girls and say, it's okay,
Yeah, but for little boys, it's like, suck it up.
Exactly, right? So based on the socialization that the primary caregiver and those in their worlds they experience, that really can play a big part on how somebody copes with their needs, right? Do they say that, oh, it's not good to talk about my feelings, so I'm just going to avoid, as a man, you don't talk about those things. You don't have feelings. So that's why we tend to see more males as avoidant and females more as anxious, and there's, of course, outside of that spectrum, but yeah.
Okay. So I know that there is a test to test all these things.
Yeah.
We discussed that. Well, we're going to have...
We're gonna have a little fun.
And we're going to find out what kind of attachment. I think I already know.
I think we already know.
Yeah, I think we do. But it'll be fun regardless. So what is this test for?
So this test is from one of my favorite books on attachment. It's called Attached. And if you really want to learn more about attachment, like, it's a great read. And it's a manageable read. So in this book is a quiz called What is My Attachment Style? I know you volunteered to take it, so we can chat about it a little bit, which will be fun. But it gives you really good examples of what attachment styles might look like in real life, in behavior, right?
Okay.
So we've talked about them in generalities, but it kind of will give you a picture of what it looks like. So I want to see if you've been really paying attention.
Okay.
So I'm gonna quiz you before you quiz yourself.
Okay.
So I am going to read a statement, and then I want you to tell me if you think it's somebody who is displaying anxious attachment style, avoidant, or secure.
Got it.
Okay. I often worry that my partner will stop loving me.
Anxious.
Good job. I find it easy to be affectionate with my partner.
Secure.
Yep. I fear that once someone gets to know the real me, he or she won't like who I am.
Avoidant.
It's anxious. But
It's anxious?
I can definitely see why because they can have insecurities too, right?
Yeah. Okay, so read it one more time.
I fear that once someone gets to know the real me, he or she won't like who I am.
Okay. Maybe I was under the impression that they were thinking this, so they just don't say it.
Well, they can think this too. And it's not, and that's why, and we had talked about this before, that, this, like, attachment styles exist on a spectrum, right? Like, just because you might be displaying more avoidant tendencies or anxious tendencies or even secure doesn't mean that you don't have moments where you display the other, right? Does that make sense? So it's not always super cut and dry. It's like it's like a majority of our behaviors. If they look like this, then we say, okay, we tend to side anxiously attached versus avoidant kind of thing.
So like a secure attachment, maybe they are feeling this way, but then they're more able to vocalize that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right, exactly. We all have thoughts, feelings, and needs and desires, and the person who is securely attached knows that and doesn't feel like so nervous and scared that if I bring this up, you know, that it's going to be this huge issue and they're going to leave me kind of thing, right? For sure. So,
okay.
I find that I bounce back quickly after a breakup. It's weird how I can just put somebody completely out of my mind.
Avoidant.
Why are you laughing, Mo?
Because.
When I'm not involved in a relationship, I feel somewhat anxious and incomplete.
That one is anxious.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. I find it difficult to emotionally support my partner when he or she is feeling down.
I find it difficult to
emotionally support my partner when he or she is feeling down.
Maybe anxious.
Avoidant.
Avoidant?
Yeah, avoidants tend to really struggle with emotion, right? If you think about it, they've learned to avoid emotion. So they don't have the privilege and skills to feel comfortable exploring their emotions more often. So it's hard for them to empathize, you know, and know how to talk about emotions because they've been taught to avoid them, you know? I think you can speak to that as a man, right?
Yeah,
like
that makes sense.
Women tend to have like easier access to emotion, you know, as far as recall and identification because they've been taught that it's normal to be emotional, you know?
Yep. Okay.
But not too emotional, you know? So when my partner is away, I'm afraid that he or she might be interested in someone else.
Anxious.
Yep. My independence is more important to me than my relationships.
That's definitely avoidant.
I prefer not to share my innermost feelings with my partner.
Avoidant.
I find it difficult to depend on romantic partners.
I find it difficult
to depend on romantic partners.
Anxious?
No, but I can see why you think that because they're nervous about like them leaving. Like, but it's avoidant. That's when you're avoidant. Okay. It's like I want to value independence. I don't need anybody. I think about my relationships a lot.
Secure.
No. What did you say? Secure?
Secure?
No.
I think about my relationships a lot.
A lot.
Anxious.
Anxious, preoccupied. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't feel the need to act out much in my romantic relationships, and I'm generally satisfied with most of my romantic relationships.
Secure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you kind of get the general idea. Like, I think it's sometimes it's hard to tell which one is which. But yeah, again, like we said, it's not on a spectrum, or it is on a spectrum. It's not like one way versus the other. And this quiz is really good to take so that you can have idea of how many of each traits you tend to, you know, display, to see if it's something you want to work on.
Got it. Okay. So it seems like secure, like you said, might be the gold standard for attachments, but they seem to have the best luck in relationships, in most relationships.
Yeah, I mean, research has shown that if there's people that are securely attached, they're more likely to be able to communicate about things and resolve conflict, obviously. So you're more likely to be able to maintain a long-term relationship. So it's not that people that tend to lean avoidant or anxious can't. They just have more challenges, which is why therapy, especially couples therapy, is really great. If you are, you know, in a couple and you find that somebody is more avoidant or more anxious, a therapist can help you identify those things and talk about how to move through those, right? For example, I mean, in my practice, I also see couples, and I have a couple that, you know, one tends to be avoidant, one is anxious. They've been married for 30 years. They're an amazing couple, but one of them has more difficulty in sharing their emotions because they're more avoidant, and so they kind of minimize them. They haven't been taught or practiced identifying those emotions. So what I do in therapy is help that person have that space and the vocabulary to know how to express how they feel and what they need. Because again, avoidants have needs too. They just don't always have the tools that would be helpful for them.
Yeah. So if secure seems to have the best luck, if you are avoidant or anxious, it doesn't mean it's hopeless, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why therapy is super helpful. That, if you are reading this book or listening to this and you're like, oh, I think I might be anxiously attached or avoidant, it's not like all hope is lost. It's definitely something to be mindful of. In this book, Attached, they talk about how in some research that they did, some data they found is that, one, we know that you do have the ability to transform your attachment style. So if you find yourself, falling as an avoidant or in the anxious category, know that you can work on the skills to move closer towards a secure attachment. Mm-hmm. The book will tell you that in 4 years, 1 out of 4 people changed their attachment style. So there is hope. The reason why it probably isn't more, but can be more, is it has to do with awareness, right? Most people have no idea what the fuck we're talking about right now,
what
right?
attachment is.
Can
This
I
is
say
actually
fuck?
this.
Is this like,
yeah.
Okay. So if you learn, via the book or, conversation with somebody else and you're like, oh, I might be anxiously attached or avoidant, you can say, okay, maybe that's something I could be working on. Maybe that's why I've struggled to, maintain friendships, romantic relationships. And does it guarantee you a spouse if you are one way or another? No, but it definitely helps your chances if you know how to communicate your feelings and feel comfortable and confident addressing them with the partner. And again, secure people still understand that nobody's perfect. So even, another securely attached person, you're going to have challenges with them and they're not going to meet every single need that you have all the time. But you have better chances when you are able to feel comfortable talking about those things and ask for your needs.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I do this without even knowing these attachment styles. So sometimes I do get anxiety, and sometimes I do get social anxiety.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh my God, did I say something stupid?
Yeah.
Did I not handle this situation? Yeah. Even in work sometimes, where I think like, damn, I messed up. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't handle the situation in work well. And I'll just keep going over in my head, and then I just sit back and I kind of think, and I'm like, dude, probably no one cares.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
No one cares. You're just being anxious about, these things. And it's like, they probably are not even thinking about that moment that you just keep playing in your head over and over.
Totally. And that's what I was talking about earlier with that, like, attachment style. When you think of attachment, historically, people are like, oh, that has to do with, like, relationships and couples therapy. But what you just said is a perfect example of how if you've struggled with attachment, you're also struggling with how you relate to yourself, right? We have a relationship with others, but we also have a relationship with ourselves and our own feelings. So if you don't feel great, about yourself, you're worried, you're questioning yourself, and instead of like comforting yourself, like, hey, it's okay, Mo, like nobody's thinking about you. Like, I understand that you're nervous. Like, if you, said something, I mean, I do this myself.
Yeah.
I am a human as well, besides a therapist, but I've definitely been in those circumstances that I was in a social setting and I said something that was like, I'm like, God, Kevin, like, why did you say that? Like, you're so stupid. But the secure attachment part of me would be like, it's all right. Like, nobody is really listening. And if I said something that's stupid or silly, to my friend, they're going to know me well enough and know that my intention wasn't, to be an asshole. It's because I'm human, know, and I have thoughts and feelings of my own, right? And so that's something that we do in therapy is figure out, what are the issues you're having, right? It could be some social anxiety, and say, maybe we need to change your relationship with yourself, right? And a big part of my work is teaching people how to be more compassionate to themselves, right? Instead of being like, you're an idiot, Catherine, like, why did you say that?
Yeah.
Just be like, it's okay, like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, you can clarify with them. Like, if you said something that you're truly, like, uncomfortable with or embarrassed about, you can go and be like, hey, that thing I said yesterday, like, I don't know if you interpret it. And I've done this myself.
I have to.
I've done this myself with good friends that I'm like, hey, I said this thing yesterday. Like, I don't know if you took it this way, but I was thinking about that. And they're like, no, you're good, girl. Like, I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah. Usually they don't even care.
No.
Yeah.
It's
Because they're
awesome.
just like, that's just you.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's a great sign that you've done that, right? Because that says that I am trying to trust, or I can trust that I can address things with people. And there's a chance that they're not going to be like, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if you felt like, if you didn't trust your environment at all and you didn't trust anybody around you, you probably wouldn't take the risk to even try that. So that's good.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So these types, let's say you do take the test, right?
Yeah.
And you figure out I am mostly an anxious attachment style. Does it usually have negative effects on someone? Like once they realize, like, oh, I'm this kind of person, does it mess up their self-esteem? Does it, cause them to be more anxious about who they are?
Yeah. I mean, I think I know what you're asking. I think, which is why I'm happy you'll take the test. It's like a little nerve-wracking to like, no, because there's this connotation that secure equals good. Insecure, whether anxious or avoidant, equals bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be nerve-wracking because, if you're like, oh, if somebody knows that I'm anxiously attached or avoidant, they're going to see me and be like, red flag, stay away. And unfortunately, with social media, so I think I'll say this. Social media is a great platform to educate people. The problem with that is you're speaking to an unknown audience, right? So when people pump out content, whether it's fellow professionals, fellow therapists, or not, you're typically speaking to something that is important to you and you're generalizing, right? The problem is when we generalize, we leave out everybody else that's not included. Right? So, for example, there might be people on social media that are like, if he does this and he does that, he's avoidant and he's bad, stay away from him. And it's kind of shitty because one, he's a human and we don't even know who this he is, right? We're talking about a general person. And whether you're avoidant or anxious, it's not bad. It's just a way in which you learned how to survive, right? Unfortunately, you didn't feel comfortable to have the tools to address your feelings and feel like your feelings and desires and needs were going to get met. So you've coped in this way. But yeah, we definitely have to be careful because I think we can get caught up in like shame culture of like, if you're this, you're that. And, we're never going to get anywhere in society, if we can't be a little less judgmental because people are less likely to be open to learning and growing if they feel that they're going to be shamed because of their attachment style.
Got it. So I have two scenarios here. We'll start with the first one.
Okay.
Let's say someone comes in and they figure out what their attachment style is. Let's say it's anxious or one of the ones or avoidant. What are some of the things they can do to help change them to be more secure?
Yeah. So obviously awareness is the first thing, right? Like I'm going to explore, like I said, and develop insight and make sure that if they feel like this is true for them, like if they're anxious or avoidant, they have to first see it as a problem, right? Like if they don't see it as a problem,
there's no changing them.
We're doing nothing. So we have to talk about what their anxious tendencies or avoidant tendencies has yielded them, right? And say, okay, this is what you're getting. This is what you want. Are they compatible? If they're not compatible, then we have to say, okay, well, what are the options? And that's what I do in therapy. I say, look at all your options. Let's experiment. This is not working for you. Why don't we try something else, right? Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. The world is your oyster, right? So that's what I do with people. And we can try to get them to practice. I provide education, right? And say that, okay, typically, if we're talking about the avoidant, you ignore how you feel. You don't address these problems. You just pretend they don't exist. Why not? Do you trust this person? Do you think this would generally be a safe person if you told them how you felt? And I do it imaginary first. Before doing real life experiences and telling people to venture out into the real world, I say, let's think about it, right? Like, you have a partner. Do you think if you shared this, how would they react? If they think that person will lose their shit, it's really unsafe, then it's like, maybe we shouldn't do that yet, because that would be unsafe for them.
Yeah.
Right? But if they have somebody in their lives that they're like, no, they'd probably be okay with it. I don't know, maybe not, but probably be okay with it. I'd say, okay, well, maybe you consider talking to them. The choice is theirs. I never tell anybody what to do in therapy, ever. But let's see how it goes, right? And so new experiences from our past can change how we interact with the world, right? So historically, if we have shared our feelings and been shamed for those feelings, we might not be communicating them anymore, right? But if we start to create new experiences, whether with people in our current worlds, prior attachment figures, that's great, right? If I have a client who is willing and able to work on their relationships with the primary caregivers that they struggled with in the past, awesome. If not, we can reconceptualize how they viewed that and say, okay, maybe, mom or dad, for example, weren't trying to shame you. It's not that they hate you. They just didn't know how to cope any better. They weren't taught the communication skills. They weren't taught that it's okay to talk about your feelings. So that is the education piece where we can say, oh, okay, that makes sense. That could lead somebody to say, okay, maybe I can try these skills with them, maybe, or other people in their lives. And if those new experiences go well, they're more likely to say, maybe I'll try it again, right? And new habits can form. That's how our style can change.
Got it. So let's say the second scenario is, let's say you're in a relationship and your partner has one of these avoidant or anxious, and you want to try to communicate with them better. How do you go about approaching somebody who has those two different type, to start to get to get closer with that person, or to...
Yeah, I mean, you want to try to...
Like, if someone's avoidant, how do you go about trying to open them up? Like, is that something that can be done, or...
Yeah, I mean, you can... I mean, I have an advantage. I have formal skills in knowing how to do that.
Okay.
So you could share how you feel.
Okay.
Vulnerability is huge.
And that's something that secure attachment is, right?
Yeah, for sure. Right? Like, the hope and idea is that the person that I'm working with, we're working towards a secure attachment with them. That's the idea. And part of secure attachment is sharing how you feel, and in that scenario, it might be that, hey, every time I talk to you, it seems like, you kind of shut down, and I'm feeling really lonely, I would really like it if, we could do this, and how we talk to people is just as important, if not more important, than what we say. So, we have to be careful that sometimes people that are anxiously attached are so preoccupied and anxious and fearful about their attachment that it affects how they communicate, right? They might communicate, but it's protest behavior is what we call it, right?
Okay.
So it might be like attacking. It might be very like aggressive, right? How we approach things. Blamey, maybe, right? I'm going to blame you. Yes, like you're not doing enough. And the more you we do, the more the avoidant is going to shut down.
Yeah.
Right. So what I teach people, individuals and couples, is how to deactivate their activation system, right? To self-soothe before going in to communicate, to speak in vulnerability, to talk about and with vulnerable emotion versus defensive or protective emotion like anger, right? Like when I sense somebody's angry at me, I'm more likely to shut down than if somebody said, hey, like, you know, this happened the other day and I was really hurt. You know, if I can see that true core vulnerable emotion, I'm less defensive because I feel bad.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that would work. That would work. I don't want to say against, but that would work towards someone who's avoidant or anxious, right? As long as you come at them from that vulnerable aspect and not accusing them of anything, you're always going to get a good reaction.
You have a better chance, right? Yeah. There's a ton of factors, and we can't guarantee that if you do this, then the anxious or the avoidant person is going to act in this exact way. But you definitely have a better chance. Honestly, like if you're in one of those situations and you're really struggling on your own, finding a therapist to help you, like for couples therapy is amazing. I believe in the work that, you know, couples therapists do. And sometimes you really need a third party who is not biased, not involved, to say, this is kind of what I'm seeing. You know, it's my job. I don't have the past injuries that one partner might have that's fueling how they interact with the other one. Mm-hmm. So I have a fresh perspective to say, you know, when so-and-so, you know, reaches out to you, like, what is this like for you? How do you feel? Is this hard? You know, how do you know what I mean? I can kind of help them through that.
And how does someone go about finding a good therapist to do these kinds of things?
Yeah, so word of mouth is one of the best ways. So if you ask around and say, hey, do you know anybody who, you know, who's a good therapist? That's really great. You're more likely to, you know, go to therapy if you have a friend who you trust. It's like, oh yeah, this person is awesome. Phycology Today is a really great resource. It's a website on the internet. It allows you to filter based on like gender, if they take insurance or not, location, styles of therapy. So if you've looked up, hey, I looked on the Google and you're like, I struggle with this. And I mean, obviously you have to look at the source, but you know, let's say Google's like, you know, DBT might be really helpful for you. You can filter that way. But yeah, I mean.
Was it DBT?
DBT.
What is DBT?
DBT is dialectical behavior therapy.
Okay.
We could do a whole episode on that. I love it. It's highly effective with a lot of different, you know, struggles, mental health struggles, but even people that are just trying to learn more about themselves. But I won't go into it here. But there's a lot of research that has proven how effective it is.
Okay. Yeah. DBT.
Yep.
Okay. That's something to look into. Okay. Yeah. And what resources can someone use if, let's say, they want to prep themselves either for therapy or just to get a better understanding of themselves?
Yeah. So I love books for a great way to supplement therapy. Some people are using insurance to use it, like to go through therapy, which is great. Some people do private pay, aka like for me, I don't accept insurance, so I'm very cognizant that the people coming to me, they're paying out of pocket to see me, right? Like I would hope that, you know, you're very motivated, right? And my clients tend to be very motivated, but in order to reduce the time, I guess you would say, to get ahead of the game, books. Attached is a really great book for attachment styles in particular. Hold Me Tight is one of my other favorite books that is based on attachment theory. It's especially really good for couples. This book, she writes a couple other books on like working with individuals too. But if you're working on your relationship or you're struggling in your relationship, this book is amazing. I can go on and on. So usually when I see somebody, you know, in therapy, I tailor my recommendations to them, right? Like if I know that they're not a big reader, I try to choose something that's like easy to digest and shorter. If they really like to know the like research behind it and the why, I'll do more like academically driven books. So, I mean, I love reading and I love recommending books if I feel like my client will actually read the books.
Yeah. And you got a good one. I Don't Want to Talk About It.
Yes.
That's another one.
Yes. I just started reading that one. I'm halfway through it, so I haven't finished it, but it's really great. There's not many books that are specifically on men's mental health. So that's why I was happy to learn about it. Terry Real is the author of the book, and there's actually a lot of videos on the internet that he's done. Videos are also a really great way to learn if people are just not like big readers. They can't hold their focus or attention on a book for too long. Videos are a great resource or intro to things to get people like, oh, maybe I want to learn a little bit more. Men's mental health is just not talked about nearly enough. Unfortunately, like the numbers are continuing to skyrocket, and actually, you know, men are actually more likely, unfortunately, to die by suicide than women. So that's why I was happy to find a resource that's great, and I believe, my opinion, that the reason for that is the way we've socialized our men, right? We don't allow them to feel comfortable talking about their needs and feelings, and so they keep it all to themselves, and that's why I think we have a big problem. So yeah, it's I can talk another episode on men's mental health.
If someone wanted to get in contact with you, where can people find you?
So I am on Instagram. Professional Emo Kid is my Instagram handle. My website and contact information is on there. My website is discoverwellnessfl, as in Florida.com. Best way to contact me is via email. I check that pretty frequently, Monday through Friday. That's how I set up consults if somebody wants to start therapy with me. I don't see people that I have a relationship with. So like friends, I can't do that because I'm biased, obviously. If people are like, hey, I've seen you at the gym before, like, can you see me for therapy? Ask. You know, it depends on the context of the relationship. And I'm totally cool with like talking to people about it, so I can let you know, maybe yes or maybe not. And if I'm not a good fit for you, I likely know somebody who could be, and I'm happy to connect people with services with whoever is best for them.
Perfect. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.